and the flight of some winged creature, which is the owl, and it's caught in a freeze frame. That is one freaky looking owl. Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today it is my great pleasure and honor to be able to continue on with these discussions, episode by episode, regarding this great series known as Twin Peaks, which is represented in many releases. For example, this box set release right here. But what a great show this is. But you didn't need me to tell you that, because this has so many fans, so many admirers the world over. And so I count myself as being one of those fans. I have seen the show many times. While I don't hold myself out to be in any way an expert when it comes to Twin Peaks, I am a big fan. And I respect the world, and I love and cherish the world and the characters. And it is my hope that I can try my best to convey to you, my dear friends, just how much I love and respect to this show. Yes, as we have been discussing in previous episode discussions, of course, let us focus on the episode events leading up to and including this episode 16, directed by Tim Hunter. So many things to say about this. It is packed. They all are packed. These episodes are all packed with stuff, but this one as well is packed. So let us move forward, shall we? And I will make mistakes along the way, and I'll try my best to rectify and remedy those mistakes. But please accept my deepest apologies in advance for any mistakes I will make. But as I say, I'll try to correct them going forward. Now, with that being said, episode 16, my goodness. And if we recall, the previous episode ended with the discovery, the really gruesome discovery of the body of Madeline Ferguson. And now we have one of the shots, the opening shots, one of the opening shots being the sort of kind of slow motion-y affected shot of the four law enforcement officers, included in which is Albert. Albert seems to be returning as well. And based on what he says, his forensics report, he recognizes that the killer who killed Madeline is the same killer who killed Laura Palmer. And so we have also the gruesome detail of the letter kind of wedged under the fingernail there. Here, it's identified as the letter O. So this is another very gruesome detail. And so we then have a kind of confirmation, at least from Albert's forensics, that yes, indeed, the killer of Maddie is also the killer of Laura Palmer. And if that's the case, we as viewers know, of course, that really horrifying detail of who killed Madeline Ferguson, that being Leland Palmer Bob. And if what Albert says is true, then that means, yes, this is confirmation that Leland killed Laura Palmer. So this is the gruesome discovery, and now the hunt is on. But Cooper, of course, is trying to lead the investigation, but he is admittedly lost. He's not quite sure what to do. But at the urging of many people around him, including Albert, by the way, who urges him to carry on and to rely upon whatever instincts and skills that he has, or visions or that sort of thing, to rely on those skills to try to catch this killer, this monster, before he takes another bite. So there is this sense of urgency that everyone feels, including Albert. So this is, of course, in many ways, a very high-pressure episode. And we see, of course, other details that emerge in this high-pressure episode. Let's just go in various places. So if we stay with the law enforcement aspect for a moment, a little bit later on in the episode, we know that there is more questioning of Philip Gerard and then Mike as well in the room, in the hotel room. And here we have more information about the interpretation of the dream. And remember, from an earlier episode, we had the dream, the key dream sequence or vision, however one might interpret this. It is referred to here as the dream of the red curtained room, and the figure known as the man from another place, and also a figure which looks like Laura Palmer walking towards Cooper and whispering something in Cooper's ear. Let's keep this image of whispering something in another person's ear. This is a very important image. We actually see an image of this later, Cooper whispering something into the ear of Sheriff Truman at a very key point of this episode, at the climactic point of this episode. But so this idea of the image of one figure whispering something to the other figure. In this case, we have that in the dream. And this dream image or this dream logic is being relied upon. And of course, one of the things that emerged elsewhere in that dream is the line about gum, chewing gum. That gum you like is going to come back in style. And this will also reemerge at last as a very critical leitmotif that forms a very important clue to unravel the mystery that will lead to the conclusion that Sheriff Truman, or I should say Dale Cooper, reaches towards the climax of this episode. But now we have also furthering details about the relationship between Mike and Bob. They were partners, he said, and so there's also this idea of a golden circle, and so the emergence or reference to the color gold is also very important. Maybe this color gold might be something that is worth remembering. We might have seen flashes of gold light, for instance, when the giant first encountered Cooper, or Cooper first encountered the giant. There's a flash of light, if you recall. And then also we might see the color gold later. Let's remember this. But the golden circle, of course, the gold circle, this is reference to, as Cooper reminds us, the ring. And this is the idea that the giant took the ring, but the ring will be returned at a key point. Maybe that key point is coming very soon, maybe in this episode. In fact, it is this episode, right, as we know from later, from the climax of this. But the gold ring, the rings, the circle. Now, we have to remember that rings are very, very important in the world of Twin Peaks. We see rings a lot everywhere. And so without going into any further detail, we may see more rings in the future. So let's keep an eye out for what kinds of rings we have seen, what kinds of rings we may see in the future. Speaking of other rings, we also have, and also I should point out too that I forgot to mention, in the episode where Madeline is killed by Leland, there's a moment where we cut back to the roadhouse, that sequence. We see Cooper sitting at the table there in the center with Margaret on one side and Sheriff Truman on the other, and there's a glass in front of him on the table. At one of the key moments when he's looking at the vision or the image on the stage, you can see that he is reaching for his hand, and it looks like he is touching his ring finger. I think it looks like he's touching his ring finger on his right hand. I don't know what the significance is of that, if indeed what I'm guessing he's doing is correct. His right hand versus his left hand, his ring being on his left hand or his right hand, it's not clear. Of course, by this time, the ring was taken by the giant from an earlier episode. But in any event, it's an interesting detail, but it's obscured by the glass mug on the table. So I'm not quite sure if that's the case, but you can see a kind of gesture. He's touching his finger in that way. So it reminds me too of rings going on fingers and the like. So let's keep an eye out for that. Indeed, going to another aspect of this story or this episode, we do see early on in the episode a ring going on to the finger of Donna, that being by James, and we see them talking, and there's a kind of almost a confirmation of their love. There's a little bit of awkwardness that's suggesting that maybe they had an intimate moment or two the night before or something. I'm not sure. Donna and James are now once again established as a couple and an item. And so there is that, of course, that type of love in the air. But of course, this is going to be tested a little bit later in this episode, is it not? When the discovery of Maddie, or the information about Maddie, is given by Donna to James, and James reacts in that really almost kind of emotionally volcanic way outside there in the woods. And so he kind of runs off, not knowing, a type of confusion and a type of not being able to help Maddie, as he points out, and then drives off, leaving leaving Donna there, Donna pleading with him to stay, but he won't. And so this is a very big part of this. We see a union or a confirmation of their union early on in the episode, Donna and James, but then later on in the episode, we see them break apart. And whether this breaking apart is temporary or permanent, we shall have to wait and see. But James seems to be on his way out of Twin Peaks, again, trying to reckon with all the various emotional turmoil and chaos that has been happening around him since and even perhaps prior to the death of Laura Palmer. So there's a lot going on with Donna and James, of course, as we know. Incidentally, there's also a lot of other things going on with Donna, because a little bit later, in the earlier part of this episode, of course, we have the diner, and we have some intrigue between Vivian and Norma, and some suggestions about how to better prepare an omelet. So there's a little bit of condescending nature, at least as Norma interprets it. And Norma pleads with her, saying that she is trying very hard. So there's tension between mother and daughter here. But also in the diner, we have the phrase as spoken by Andy. And he says, and again, pardon me for my poor pronunciation of the French language, but it is, j'ai une âme solitaire. J'ai une âme solitaire. And this is translated as, I'm a lonely soul. Now, this is very significant, and indeed, Donna recognizes the significance. Good for Donna. She is a great detective with great detective skills, because she remembers that this was a line, j'ai une âme solitaire, that was spoken by none other than the young boy who appeared to be the grandchild of the elderly lady who identified herself as Mrs. Tremont. This was during the Meals on Wheels sequence in one of the earlier episodes, with the cream corn and the delivery of the meal and the young boy and the magic trick. And you heard him say, j'ai une âme solitaire. And then we have Andy mouthing this same phrase. Why? Because Andy recognizes this phrase, or remembers this as being the suicide message, or the message that was written on the note prior to Harold Smith's suicide, his very tragic death. And so Donna is able to put this piece of information together, and then this encourages her to bring Dale Cooper to the house, the Meals on Wheels house, which is, of course, nearby to where Harold Smith's house was, and to where Mrs. Tremont lives. So he takes Dale Cooper to Mrs. Tremont's house. And when we go there, she's standing at the door. She's on one side and Dale Cooper's on the other side, at the doorway, the front door. And who responds but Mrs. Tremont? But Mrs. Tremont is a very different Mrs. Tremont from the Mrs. Tremont that we saw from an earlier episode. And this is a very different person with very different circumstances. There doesn't seem to be any young boy there. It doesn't seem, the decor of the inside looks very different. So this is a very key sequence. Okay, this is revealing to be another mystery. What's going on? What's this deal with Mrs. Tremont? Who is Mrs. Tremont? And who, if this is the real Mrs. Tremont, who is the other Mrs. Tremont? What's going on? Are there two Mrs. Tremonts, or what's going on? Where's the young boy? Where's the elderly lady that we saw before? Who knows? What's also very interesting too, get a look at that shot of Donna on one side in the doorway and Cooper on the other side of her in the doorway, and they're asking for Mrs. Tremont, but they see someone who looks like a different Mrs. Tremont, or it is a different person than the person that Donna recognized. Remember this, because we might see something that is of a similar nature, a similar setup, maybe a similar set of characters go somewhere asking for someone, and they find someone else going forward. And so this might be a very interesting parallel that we might or might not be able to draw based on this scene. It's a very curious scene indeed. And indeed, in terms of the plot, we have Mrs. Tremont here, this Mrs. Tremont giving the letter, or the envelope, over to Donna. And we see that this is fragments or excerpts from the diary, February 20th, of Laura Palmer, February 22nd and February 23rd. So we remember the diary is very important. I neglected to mention in an earlier episode when Dale Cooper is interrogating Ben Horne, this idea of the diary, Laura Palmer pages talking about bringing down Ben Horne, etc. So a lot is being written in the diary here. And here we have excerpts which are read aloud by Donna, the first day of which is about the dream. And it seems that Laura had a dream that was very similar to that very famous dream that Dale Cooper had. Again, I'm calling it a dream. It could be a vision. It could be a dream. Again, remember that divide between that dreams and visions that was provided oh so eloquently by Major Briggs in an earlier episode. But let's call it a dream for now because everyone seems to call it dreams here. This dream of the red curtain room, the man from another place, Laura herself is talking and her body seems to be resisting slightly, which might be a reference to this backward speak motion. That is one of the iconic moments of Twin Peaks ever. And she mentions about whispering something in Dale Cooper's ear, but she doesn't recognize him as Dale Cooper, right? She recognizes him, or she thinks that, or guesses that maybe this is Mike, someone whom Bob is afraid of. So there is knowledge of Bob. There's also the kind of idea of who Mike is, and Mike is someone who has some kind of influence or sway over Bob. But Bob is a very threatening figure. And indeed, this is something that Cooper recognizes as the same dream. So maybe Laura, when she writes about Mike, the idea is maybe she's referring to that person whom we understand to be Dale Cooper in that dream. And if you remember, that's very famous. That's a very important aspect. And again, another detail about the chewing gum will come up later with the waiter and in the roadhouse. But before we get there, let's also mention the other diary entry the next day. And then this is where Laura Palmer says that this is the day where she is going to die. And it's a very sad diary entry, but it reminds us too of something that we heard Dr. Jacoby from an earlier episode when he is being questioned by Cooper and others about how, from Dr. Jacoby's perspective, it was as though Laura was allowing herself or permitting herself to die, if you recall that. And so this is I think very consistent, allowing herself to die, and the idea that, not letting Bob in or not allowing Bob to take advantage of her. If we understand that Bob is some kind of entity that inhabits or possesses human beings, maybe Laura was the subject of that, who knows? Now, we might get some more details about that later in this episode, of course, but this is the idea, and it's a very sad, almost a type of like martyrdom aspect of Laura Palmer's death. And it might be something that we could consider going forth, the idea of Laura as martyr, or Laura as a sacrifice. The phrase sacrificial lamb comes into play here, I think. Sacrificial lamb or martyr going forward. So this is also a very key detail, again, linked to the diary, and it might be something that we might find illuminated later in this episode. Now, I spoke about Andy. Here's more of the, what's the phrase? This is the continuing saga of the sperm of Deputy Andy Brennan. Because as we know, there's all this stuff about low sperm count, high sperm count, and who is the father of the child that of Lucy. Is it Andy or is it Richard Tremaine, Dick Tremaine? And so Andy is aggressive. Now he calls Horne's department store, Men's Fashions, asks for Richard Tremaine. He's still somewhat polite. So Lucy is, on the one hand, seems to be very almost excited that Andy is taking this authoritative step, but then a little bit hesitant, right? So Lucy seems to be excited, but then a little bit disappointed. But this leads to, of course, the continuing saga of Andy Brennan's sperm, or perhaps to put it another way, this love triangle, or this triangle among Dick Tremaine, Andy Brennan, and Lucy, right? And so this also leads to an understanding of the installation of the fire sprinklers in the sheriff's department, which is another important detail. And then we'll see, of course, later how Richard Tremaine's smoking will have a very huge impact what happens at the climax of this. So, and I don't know if I don't know about you, but this is a sort of detail that maybe makes me like Richard Tremaine less in terms of how his overall, what his overall effect is in terms of this whole plot of Twin Peaks. But maybe he didn't know. It wasn't his fault because he didn't know, or maybe it was his fault. Who knows? But in any event, it's a big deal in terms of the sprinklers and the smoking and Richard Tremaine. Also, incidentally, too, we have Lucy saying that she will make a decision right, about and also there will be maybe some kind of test that will take place about who is the father of her child. So it looks like there's going to be some kind of competition between Richard Tremaine and Andy Brennan going forward. So Lucy is actually in a very almost powerful position in this continuing saga. So we shall see how this unfolds going forward. So that's another intriguing aspect, I suppose. Now, going back to other aspects, I mentioned a little bit, right, Ben Horne. Ben Horne is in custody. I forgot to mention earlier, I mentioned about an earlier episode how Shelley and Bobby are in need of money. And one of the things that Bobby does is he takes that little tape that was found in the shoe of Leo Johnson, or the boot of Leo Johnson, boot or shoe, and listens to the recording and about the mill and the fire, Ben Horne and Leo Johnson, and he writes the note and tries, I think, to as an attempt to try to maybe blackmail Ben Horne. But actually that wouldn't be so opportune, because at the moment Ben Horne is arrested, he's in custody, and he's the prime suspect in the murder of Laura Palmer. So I'm not sure about the timing of that, but in any event, Ben Horne is still in custody, and he is still he's still prime suspect. And we see a continuation of one of the earlier confrontations between him and Pete Martell, and now we have Mr. Tojimura making one more appearance, but Tojimura then reveals himself or herself to be Catherine with the revelation of the feet and the voice change and the like. And so Catherine Martell makes the declaration here that she will make his life a living hell. And of course, she has the key, or she thinks she has the key for his salvation, namely the alibi for him. But she refuses to give that to him. And so this is, again, Ben Horne really in dire straits. He has hit a low point, a real low point here. And everyone seems to be at him. So what will happen in terms of his relationship with Catherine and the mill and the land and Ghostwood and everything? What's going to happen with all this stuff going on? How is Ben Horne, if anything, going to get out of this? Because we know that he didn't kill Laura Palmer and he didn't kill Madeline Ferguson. We know who did. But at the moment, no one else knows, at least not yet. No one else in Twin Peaks knows, at least not yet. And then going forward, too, we have further details of the investigation, and Dale Cooper really trying his best to move forward with this. But before we get to that final sort of epic confrontational scene in the Roadhouse, let us remember, too, Donna and also Leland Palmer. There is the very scary, scary scene where Donna visits Leland Palmer's house, the Palmer household, with the glasses and the smoking. And so there is the resemblance to Laura Palmer in terms of that mood and the glasses and the feel and the atmosphere that she is suggesting, which might be something that is maybe in a very dangerous way turning Leland on, Leland/Bob on. There's a little bit of an impression or gesture that is made about that during their initial meeting, Donna and Leland. And so this means that then we understand that Bob is in control, and Bob Leland is alone with Donna in the living room. And this is the place, of course, where we know that Madeline was killed. And so we see something of deja vu all over again. And if that's the case, this is a very dangerous situation indeed for Donna. There's, of course, that drink that he gives her, but it is a very scary situation indeed. What's going to happen? There's the record player, the music playing. There's also the sudden, quite almost vicious embrace that he makes. But just in the nick of time, of course, we have the someone at the door, and it's none other than Sheriff Truman. Sheriff Truman pleads with Leland to help him and go. He's going to escort him somewhere so we can all find kind of a resolution or denouement to this episode. So Donna was in a very precarious situation, was she not? And thank goodness she was able to get out of it in time. But Sheriff Truman came at the time that he did. Because I hate to think what would have happened had Sheriff Truman not arrived or not been at the door at that time. It's a very, very scary situation. But Donna is fortunately out of it, although, as I mentioned earlier, there is a situation between her and James that it seems like their relationship, at least as of now, has fallen apart, or they are now divided or distant. So what's going on there, we shall have to wait and see. But speaking of the investigation, speaking of Dale Cooper, of course, this is this episode where we have the resolution. Now, part of that resolution seems to be coming from the idea of, getting warmer. And remember, earlier on in the Great Northern, after he speaks with Philip Gerard, Mike goes to the hallway. He sees the waiter at the other end of the hall with the milk, and the idea of getting warmer and the milk. This also reminds us, too, that there are many suggestions of milk, dairy, in the world of Twin Peaks. Here's yet another image of milk, which is very interesting. And then, of course, we have the idea, too, of other details that are emerging, the blood test results of Ben Horne, which will come into play later. Again, we understand that Cooper is putting together these clues, and hopefully something will happen. He's not quite sure. He admits to being at a loss, but he thinks, his intuition says, to have all the potentially relevant persons assemble, 3, right, at the Roadhouse. So who do we have? We have Ed Hurley. We have Sheriff Truman and Albert there. We have, of course, Dale Cooper. We have Ben Horne, who's sitting alone in one of the table booths. And then we also have entering Bobby with Leo Johnson in the wheelchair. And we also have also someone is missing. But then precisely at 3, we have the entrance of, who is it? Major Briggs and the waiter, which is a really great entrance indeed. And then suddenly we have some mentionings of gum and the like. So very, very intriguing things going. Oh, and certainly before I get to more details about this, we have to remember too, there's further setup because there's this discovery of white fur. White fur on the person of Maddie, and this white fur is also identified as the white fox fur. And if you remember, there was that white fox statue or set up in Ben Horne's office. But if you remember too, there was a detail when Leland was in the office in a couple episodes ago. He took a little bit of the white fur and he put it in his pocket. Remember that? So we can understand maybe at that point, maybe Leland or Bob was taking that, and maybe he was thinking of setting up Ben Horne. Who knows? But in any event, remember that detail. That detail came back. And indeed, when Truman and Cooper were in Ben Horne's office, they realized that, yes, this was the white fox, right? And it ties Ben Horne to Maddie. And also there's more information about the phone records. Remember what Leland said about Ben Horne having a phone call, and there's a further connection that is made with Ben Horne and Laura Palmer. Incidentally, too, there's also a detail here, which I forgot to mention. I'll mention it now, which is, I think Albert says that Maddie was killed between 10 and midnight that night, and then that Cooper says that Ben Horne was arrested after that, right? Which I don't think is correct, right? Because if we remember the episode where Madeline was killed, Madeline was killed during the period where Cooper and Sheriff Truman and Margaret, the log lady, were at the Roadhouse, and they were seeing Julie Cruz singing, right? So, but remember, they arrived at the Roadhouse after, not before, but after Ben Horne was arrested, right? Ben Horne was arrested in his office with Tojamura and company there, and he tried to go out for a sandwich, but then he resisted, and he was forcibly brought in. He was brought into the sheriff station, and then they saw Margaret, and so the 3 of them then went to the Roadhouse, and then they saw this. And while they're at the Roadhouse, and we understand things were happening in the Palmer household. So assuming that chronology fits, then what he says here is somewhat of an error. It wasn't afterwards, but in fact before. Now, of course, in the world of Twin Peaks, and maybe we might see it later, sometimes the chronologies, the way we see them, aren't always the way they are. Sometimes we see scenes that were actually in a different chronology than how they are edited sequentially in terms of the sequence of the episode. So that might be a possibility, or this could just be a little bit of an error. He meant to say afterwards, but maybe he was. But Cooper, he must be very tired. He's working hard, so it's okay if that error is made. We understand what he means, though. We understand what he means. In other words, we understand that there was still the opportunity for this to have happened. So in any event, yes, we have this information that's presented here now. So I think, yes, if I have that detail correct, then in any event, we understand that Ben Horn is still a suspect. But when everyone is assembled here at the Roadhouse in this climactic scene, and the idea of the gum, and that's when Leland recognizes that gum as being his favorite gum in the whole wide world. We have the waiter who says that line, that gum, right? It's right, the gum coming back in style, and there's a freeze frame, and then a freeze frame, and then the shot of Dale Cooper, and then the dream, and then we understand that what is happening here is the dream is being interpreted or reinterpreted before our very eyes, and we hear the voice of Laura whispering, "My father killed me." And then so we have then the appearance of the giant to Cooper and the ring. The ring, the golden circle, another ring. This ring, very important. Now it returns to the person of Cooper. And so what this is then Cooper takes the opportunity to say Ben Horn is going to be brought back to custody, that Leland should accompany him as his lawyer, which is a curious statement to make, because actually officially Leland is on bail for the killing of Jacques Renault. So I'm not sure to what extent he is officially able to serve as anyone's attorney because he's on. But anyway, he is brought back because it's actually a ruse, as we know, because they go to the station. Ben Horn is about to be put into the cell or the interrogation room. And before that, we have Dale Cooper whispering something into Sheriff Truman's ear. Again, one character whispering something into another person's ear. We saw that in the dream. We saw that now. We might see it again in the future. All right, anyway, that's great stuff. And as Ben Horn is about to be put in, Sheriff Truman and Dale Cooper instead throw Leland Palmer in, and then now the game's up. Now we understand. Everyone understands, and we have that line from Ben Horn saying, "Leland?" Right, and everyone looks through the little window in the doorway, and Leland is going, just chaos, running into the walls, just right. And this is Bob, and so this is not enough. Of course, we need a confession. So a little bit later, there is the group going in there with the confession. And we have Leland speaking as Bob in this very frightening confrontational scene. Again, an affirmation that indeed it was Leland Bob who killed Madeline and thus killed Laura Palmer. And Bob saying that Leland was a great vehicle, but he's now full of holes. So maybe there's something it's almost time to, as he says, shuffle off to Buffalo. And also there's mentioning of, this tendency for knives, just like that thing that happened to Cooper in Pittsburgh. So there's also mentioning of Pittsburgh. Remember, Pittsburgh was mentioned in an earlier episode with regard to something that happened with Cooper and Wyndham Earle. So Pittsburgh seems to be a very critical place for Cooper. And now it's mentioned here. But then, of course, we have the return of this is a confession. And now Sheriff Truman is convinced that, yes, Leland Palmer is the killer of Madeline Ferguson and indeed Laura Palmer. But we have, of course, the return of the poem, Fire, Walk With Me, and the refrain that was heard by Mike and Bob in the dream going forward. And so this phrase, "Fire, Walk With Me," is a phrase that is very, very important in the world of Twin Peaks. You may know it already, but we've heard it before. We saw it written on the scrap of paper. It was something that was spoken by Mike on many occasions, and now it's being spoken by Leland Bob here, but not before. Before certain events that happen that lead into the climax of this episode. Of course, we have now that exchange with Richard Tremaine and Andy and Lucy, the smoke leading to the fire sprinklers being set off, and the water and the like. And so before that, of course, we have Cooper revealing to everyone how he put the mystery together. Again, the blood sample from Ben Horn didn't match And we also have Robertson, son of Robert, the children, right? And we also have the hair turning white, and also dancing, the dancing man in the dream and dancing, and Leland dancing a lot. So there are all these clues that are in this very kind of obscure way are being put together before our very eyes. But it's still in this great world of Twin Peaks, it makes sense. And so that means that Leland is the culprit, or Leland is not the culprit. He is the killer. And then the water. And then, of course, this means that we see Bob screaming. And this leads to the really horrifying instance of the death of Leland against, we understand, maybe just running towards the steel, just crushing him in this, again, very violent way. But it's off camera, so we have to imagine the violence. And we go in to the room after Shriftrum tries to open the door, but he slips on the water, and it's a little too late, unfortunately. But they go in, the dying moments of now Leland Palmer. And Leland Palmer, he realizes he's so filled with sadness and regret and guilt. And he realizes, oh, he killed his daughter. He killed Laura. He loved Laura. He loved Laura. And he killed him, and he's so filled with sadness and just screaming and crying. And these are his dying moments. And he also says, too, some details which are seemingly very significant. Also about how he uses the pronoun they and them, making him kill Laura, making him kill Teresa. The name Teresa Banks is also mentioned. Remember, Teresa Banks was a victim from about a year prior to the death of Laura Palmer. And so Teresa Banks and Laura Palmer, and then Madeline Ferguson, and then nearly Ronette Pulaski, of course. But we have, yes, the reference to Teresa Banks by Leland here. So Leland then also acknowledges the killing of Teresa. And also he says something about the past, and Bob and Leland as a little boy, and he was on fire and let in, are entering into Leland. So that's the idea. So the idea or the suggestion is maybe Bob entered Leland when Leland was a little boy. And this reminds us too of the remember from an earlier episode how Leland recognizes Bob's picture and refers to Pearl Lakes and his granddad's house, Pearl Lakes as a kid, and the White House where this gray, silver-haired person lived. Although no other neighbors, again, according to Huck's investigation, seem to recall anyone by that description living in the vicinity, but in the vacant lot, etc. So we understand, therefore, that maybe Bob and Leland first encountered each other when Leland was a boy. Also, it's very curious, too, how he mentions they or them. Bob as a singular or individual entity, one might think that Bob would be referred to as he or him, but Leland refers to they or them. So that suggests a number of things. Maybe Bob uses the they, them pronoun. I don't know, maybe if Bob had his own Instagram account or something, he would say, he would have a preference of pronouns. I don't know. So that's one possibility. Or another possibility is that there might be other entities at play other than Bob or in addition to Bob. Now, if that's the case, who is that referring to? Is that referring to Mike? I mean, Mike, remember, according to Mike in the earlier part of the episode, he was saying how he and Bob were partners. So is he referring to Mike, or is he referring to someone or something else? Who knows? But in any event, there is the reference to they or them. So let's keep that in mind too. Is there more than one or more than two of these entities that are populating this nether world, if you want to call it that, of Twin Peaks? Or is it something of the they, them going forward, sort of the idea of this, anyway, the phrase is very important. Now, I should point out too that this is also a very, very sad and somber moment, and one of a type of passing, because this is where Leland Palmer is going to die. Before that, Cooper comforts him, guides him, mentions the light, looking into the light, this idea of the light or space. There might be instances later or indeed we've seen before and maybe later, where we have characters looking into some kind of void or light of some kind, maybe in the sky or something. We'll remember this. But and then we have Laura, the vision of Laura, and she's beautiful, and she forgives him. Laura, and then Leland Palmer dies. It's a very powerful scene. A very, very powerful scene indeed. And it's capped off by a type of epilogue point where the people are now outside. It seems to be a sunny day or something like that, or a sunny afternoon leading into evening hours perhaps. Cooper and Truman and Albert, and then trying to just discuss what it is they've just experienced. And Major Briggs is also there as well. And Major Briggs has that quote, right, which is of course coming from, it's taken from Shakespeare, right? Hamlet. Right, gentlemen, there's more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy. So we have this idea of things that are inexplicable, mysterious, and even an entity like Bob, Major Briggs questions whether indeed it is right. How is it really up to us to try to figure out what Bob is? And I love Cooper's response, because Cooper is very much he's very confident, and he's very assertive here. He says, "It is, yes, it is our responsibility, because it's our job to stop it." Bravo, Cooper! This is the heroic Cooper that we all know and love. He has a mission, and he must protect all. He must protect the innocent going forward. So it's a very, very powerful moment. And indeed, the idea that Leland's dead, and is this something? Is this what's going on? Or maybe it's hard to believe. It's hard to ponder. But what we also have to realize too, that Cooper then reminds us of the crime that happened to Laura Palmer. A father raping and killing his own daughter. I mean, that is incredibly difficult to stomach. That is incredible. That's a horrifying crime, and that is indeed that's the crime that took place. And Cooper giving us these very blunt and direct terms describing the crime. I mean, this is, I think, this is a reminder of the cruel and horrifying world that Twin Peaks also inhabits. I mean, it's a beautiful world. It's angelic. There's the scenery and nature and the wonder and beauty, but there's also the ugliness and the horrifying, and indeed the frightening and terrible. And Cooper reminding us of this, I think, is very bold. It's one of the most direct moments, I think, of the entire series. So it's also it's drawing attention to these unexplainable, the inexplicable, the absolutely unfathomable. It's impossible to try to comprehend what's going on, but that's the point. We have to recognize that this is almost beyond one's comprehension, but it is their job to try to stop it. And also the final cap in the episode is, if Bob was real, because they say, right, people saw Bob, Sarah Palmer, Madeline, Dale Cooper, people saw Bob, so it must have been real, right? And if he is real, then where is Bob now? And so we have that final moment of the point of view shot or something, and the eerie music and the flight of some winged creature, which is the owl, and it's caught in a freeze frame. That is one freaky looking owl, if ever there was one. My goodness, that owl looks scary. Very, very scary. What a way to end this episode, right? The owls are not what they seem. This owl is not only an owl, which is not what it seems, but this is one scary looking owl. Wow. There we go. That's it. That's the episode. So episode 16, what an episode. Is very packed, but we have many more episodes to go. So let us continue on with our Twin Peaks journey, my dear friends. But until the next video, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies and TV shows, including Twin Peaks. Okay, my dear friends, thank you. And until the next one, take care and cheers.